In this Facebook Live, Men's Heart in Conversation, Andrew and I are having a conversation about men's sensitivity and the fact that our social conditioning has enabled us men to become ashamed of it. Sensitivity, if you ask your partner, is a really important part of our well-being and our psyche. In this Facebook Live, we have conversations about how can we change the social conditioning that we men need to enable ourselves to have more acceptance of our sensitivity and our vulnerability when it does come up. Men's sensitivity and the potential associated shame that can perhaps, or ashamed of our sensitivity as men, it's just one of those. The concept of toxic masculinity has prevented us from being able to experience our sensitivity. It's deemed as a weakness. And I think that's really detrimental to a lot of our emotional and mental health. And so, I just wondered tonight in the men's heart of conversation, whether is that an area that do we need to explore that as men to be able to create more permission, more social acceptance of sensitivity rather than being a paradox that because we do have sensitivity. Sensitivity is a really powerful place it's a powerful place, but a very vulnerable place to be in. But instead of being ashamed of it, how do we learn to start owning it and start to connecting to it? And to me, that space of sensitivity, whilst we can have an intellectual conversation about it, it's generally very emotional and very quiet and quite deep. Any thoughts, any ideas?
Yeah, you're right. Sensitivity is an innate part of our personality, or of ourselves, of our being. We are sensitive beings, but social and cultural factors conspire against that. We're talking on Facebook Live here, which of course could be viewed around the world, but certainly within an Australian context for males, certainly my generation, growing up, sensitivity was not prized. It was something that was shut down very quickly. It was shut down by peers, shut down by teachers, parents.
Well, that's interesting.
And sometimes in a well-meaning manner. You've got to harden up, toughen up. The world's a hard place. Men need to, forge ahead, be strong, don't cry. There's a lot of gender stuff in there too. Don't be a girl. Those sorts of things, which are sort of thrown in. So there's a double layer of quite problematic language going on around sensitivity.
I'm wondering whether this space that we're talking about, I'm wondering what impact that has potentially on men's mental health, depression, anger, anxiety, our interpersonal relationships. I'm wondering, whether it has a huge impact, and because of the sense of shame that's associated with paradox, is there something to be ashamed about it, or if you're wearing your heart on a sleeve, that metaphor may be a little bit too sensitive perhaps, and might need to be regulated in a little bit more of a fashion.
I'm going to go ahead and say there's nothing to be ashamed of. Sensitivity is absolutely no problems with it at all. Are there repercussions socially for doing it? Yeah, there can be. I wonder, Mark, if before we go ahead, should we look at what is shame, and perhaps define that a
Yeah,
little bit for
yeah,
anyone that might be watching. Yeah.
yeah. I've got a couple of quotes that I pulled out of this one here. The following definition. Excuse me, I need to put these onto the the.
What feeling does that bring up, Mark?
um, oh, it can actually bring up a sense of inadequacy, a vulnerability in itself. That
Yeah.
I probably avoided it for many, many years, and I couldn't read the small print on a little bottle one
Yeah, yeah.
time.
You're
These
not
are the
alone. Yeah.
oh, yeah, cool. Um, the following definitions: elusive term. Shame is a painful sense of one's basic defectiveness as a human being, while guilt is an uncomfortable, self-conscious affect related to the fear of harming others.
Okay, so there's a difference between shame and guilt.
And there is a difference between shame and guilt. In terms of shame, this is a pretty powerful, and I don't know whether our vulnerability goes to this depth or the sensitivity or being ashamed of the sensitivity such as this, but a sense of failure is a central characteristic of individuals who experience shame or guilt. The deficit is global for shamed persons. It is felt as a failure of being. Excessive shame experiences lead individuals towards feeling inadequate as human beings, as if when God had made a mistake in creating such a flawed and defective organism. The shame crisis is spiritual in that the shamed persons question the reason and meaning of their lives, often finding no justification for their existence. They believe they are less than fully human. And that is really quite solid, very hard hitting. And I have no doubt that sometimes when we do, when we muck up really badly. Hi, Sally Phillips, good to see you. Thank you for coming on. That sense of shame can be there. But I'm wondering whether there is a bit of a difference between feeling ashamed of our sensitivity compared to the shame of it. I'm wondering whether there'd be a different degree of energy there somehow.
Yeah, okay. So I wonder then whether that difference could be between feeling ashamed is perhaps occurring in a social context where we're interacting with others and we reveal something, or we're talking about sensitivity tonight. So we express our sensitivity and it's not received well, or even worse, it's punished, and so we might feel ashamed of ourselves, which I might be wrong, sounds like more on the end of embarrassment, but a little worse than embarrassment. Whereas that shame that you're talking about in that definition there, kind of that hardcore shame sounds like a deep felt sense of I'm no good.
And I think you can, when I historically could work in the addiction field, that hi Pete Kavanagh, good to see you, mate. There was that sense of shame, that's that deeper, goes to that core. And it's really interesting. I was reading some neuroscience stuff today, and it was talking about, and I might need to quote this next week. I cut and pasted it out of a book by Alex Corp, I think it was. The Upward Spiral, it was called, and he was talking about how shame affects it affects the same centre, the reward centre in the brain. But I'll get more detail on it for next week. That ashamed, even sitting here, I don't know how many times tonight, trying to get this conversation alive. Sitting there momentarily, it just wasn't working. I deleted them very quickly because I wasn't putting them ones out there. But even that slight stuff, there's a sort of that sense of exposure, that sense of humiliation. Oh my God, this is not working. Yeah, yeah. If I didn't have, you know, yeah, at some level, I'd have to experience that. Yeah, I do feel that. I do take that on board, and oops, this is really uncomfortable. This is really exposing myself, and yeah, is there, yeah,
Is
is
that
there a
about
sense?
not being good enough, or is it about an ideal of masculinity that's been suggested to us, that you need to be technological, proficient, have it all together, in charge, it's all running smoothly, captain of the ship?
Oh, mate, look, we've done
All of
three.
a sudden the ship's sinking.
Well, yeah, mate, we've done three conversations, and four now, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
worked every time except for tonight. And I was looking at the battery of the phone as well, and I'm thinking, oh, halfway through, and yeah, could it work? But how do we change that issue around sensitivity? Because I'm really, really concerned that the sensitivity, there is a strong emotional component to our sensitivity. It's a very, very, I'd even use the word, I know this might sound a bit religious, but a very sacred space. And yeah, it's concerning that, when we're not coping in life, can we then be sensitive? And again, what do we men do with that? When I'm not coping, do I lock it away? Do I disown it? Do I put it in my shadow? Do I not want to? Hi, Jocelyn Connell. Hey, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. Yeah, that.
Mark, I
And
think
learn.
there's an epidemic of that. I think there's an absolute epidemic of that happening for men, right around the country. I think that you asked the question earlier, what's the impact on men's mental health? And I think it's massive. If we're cutting off a huge part of our emotional lives and trying to
Yeah.
stuff it down and
Yeah.
ignore it,
Yeah.
that's not going to work out well, is it? It takes a lot of work to keep a facade, keep a mask happening. What's the result? Anxiety, depression, despair, suicide. The toll on men is heavy. So I think this is a really important conversation to be having. It's an issue that goes right back for most men. It's a parenting issue. It's boys don't cry. Those sorts of messages that we give to boys when they're very, very young. There's a lot of social conditioning there, and it's going to take a lot of work to undo this.
Could you call that social conditioning, toxic masculinity?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's like the poison chalice of toxic masculinity has been handed down time and time again. I just want to read, especially Natalie. Natalie's over in Perth. Natalie said, especially when vulnerability is what connects us, and vulnerability is what connects us.
That is such a good comment, because if we can't own our own sensitivity and our own emotional lives, it cuts off our capacity to relate to that in others.
If we're cutting it off, is that then suggesting that we are disconnecting from ourselves and our own, and that?
Well, I think that disconnection happens first, yeah. So we're disconnecting from our own emotional lives, and then we're pulling the plug out and disconnecting from others.
Hi, Anne-Marie. This is actually working this time, so it's all happening, Anne-Marie. Good to see you. When does that disconnection? I do want to tag Marisa in this one. Last week, sorry to cut off. Last week, Marisa, I hit tag on it. That disconnection. When did that start for young boys? You know, you've got a young fella,
Turned 5 2 days ago. Yeah.
turned 5 2 days ago, and until his cognitive, until he's developed fully cognitively, probably,
Another
he'd
20
still,
years.
oh mate, it's taken me till at least into my 50s. Yeah, I'm a bit of a slow learner. I'm not the sharpest tool in the kit, but I mean, and it's like, yeah, he'd still be an emotional being
Absolutely.
at this
Yeah.
stage in, that early stages, and
Yep.
yeah, for a lot of us, it was around about grade 5, age 5. That are we taught then to disconnect it? Just in that disconnection, what's happening to ourselves? How much energy do we go into armoring up, into manning up, and what cost does that energy take? That emotional energy. What's that cost?
That's going to cost a lot of energy. It's going to cost connection to others. It's going to lead to, at best, a disconnection and isolation from other people. At worst, the capacity to hurt other people, which sometimes happens as a misplaced attempt at experiencing connection, or simply because there's a lack of feeling, which enables abuse of all kinds to occur. And it probably facilitates a lot of alcohol consumption around the country. Because alcohol is a great way of facilitating a kind of pseudo connection with others.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is not to say having a beer is a bad thing, but when we're lacking the capacity to connect to ourselves, the potential for abuse of alcohol and other drugs is certainly there.
And it's interesting that, as Natalie talked about, the vulnerability, the sensitivity part of us, I'm wondering whether that's the part of us that needs to be loved, or wants love, or is in need. Jocelyn has said, I suspect it leads to fear of our own vulnerability, question mark. Jocelyn McConnell, do you know, mate, down your way? She's saying hello. It's that, is it the sensitive side of us that is actually needing or thrives, our well-being thrives on the connection, that sense of, that need for love?
We all need love and connection. Is it our sensitive part that needs love and connection, or is it? I'd probably suggest our sensitivity awakens us and reminds us of our need for connection and love.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we, when that's awakened, how do we empower that sensitivity to deepen the love? It's like sometimes in meditation, if I'm doing a ritual to what, there's a part of me that, I don't know whether it's my sensitive side or what it is. It goes, oh, boo-hoo, I'm going to stop giving out white light, and, because nothing ever comes back. I'm going boo-hoo, boo-hoo. But then I have to stop myself when my mind's going like that in meditation, to stop and drop. And then what the anchor for me is to come into that empowered loving kindness space. And then I shift out of that, I don't know whether it's this, maybe it's the sensitive side of me that's not getting it, or has not got its needs met in the past. And it might hold, or it might trigger reactions, emotional reactions like resentment, cut off, whereas learning to recognize and identify it, as you talked about, then I can deepen that into, I can deepen the mindset there to drop into that empowered loving kindness where, it's, I believe it's really, or it feels really unconditional. It just, it's just given. There's no second thought. There's plenty of it. But I'm wondering whether the sensitive level, there's perhaps maybe maybe it's limited, or the experiences have been limited in childhood, so therefore we armor up, we protect that vulnerability, we protect that sensitivity by shutting down, using all the armor, all the invisible body armor that we've got. It's a really interesting really interesting space.
You're peeling back the layers of the onion there, Mark, and I think you've put it really well. Our reactions are not necessarily our sensitivity, but it's a reaction to the challenges of remaining connected to sensitivity. I wonder, just going back to Joss McConnell's suggestion, and maybe this is getting too much into semantics, but is our vulnerability the same as our sensitivity, or is our sensitivity the aspect of ourselves that mediates between our vulnerability and the outer world?
Good question. Can you follow that up? I just want to shout out to Dale Stone. Hi, Dale. Great to see you, mate. Can you follow that up a little bit with your? Can you use? What's your experience? Right. Just share. Would you mind sharing some of that experience to clarify that a little bit?
I'll share two things. I'll share from the head, and then I'll share from my experience.
And could I ask, is the experience your heart?
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. So from a headspace, the word sensitivity to me conjures up a sense of you're being sensitive to or in response to, like there's a relationship there. So we're being sensitive to signs or signals from other people. We're sensitive, we're picking up what's happening in others, and we're sensitive to what's happening within ourselves. Now, when I talk about kind of a heart experience, and I think back to, I'll take myself back to primary school, perhaps something's happened, someone's upset me, I'm starting to cry, and then someone said, stop being so sensitive. So now that sadness, those tears, I don't know if that's sensitivity or if that is my sensitivity has made me aware of that sadness, paid attention to it, and very quickly it's come up, and then I'm behaving in a way that perhaps wasn't deemed masculine at the time.
Is that therefore where the sense of a shame gets initiated?
I believe so. Yeah.
Now, when, for argument's sake, when the sensitivity is in need of the connection, what happens though when the sensitivity or my version or my need in that sensitivity is not getting met, or the level of connection that I wish to experience, and it might be an authentic need, is not getting met? Is that then triggering old emotional triggers like you experienced in primary school? Is it triggering unmet needs that we've accumulated throughout life? And then we armor up, feel ashamed, I can't ask for that, I can't have that met, so therefore I feel ashamed of it, and I'll lock it down, put it into Fort Knox.
So it's sounding a little bit like what Stan Groff might call a COEX, a system of condensed experience, where an experience in the present day has the same emotional resonance as something we experienced when we were younger. So as adults, we have an authentic need for connection with others, and as children we had that also. And for many of us as children, those needs weren't met, which led to shutdown and those layers of defensiveness and maybe anger, maybe resentment, maybe later on depression, anxiety. And so, yeah, when that need's not met in our adult life, we can go back into that reaction. The challenge as adults is how can we meet that sensitivity and that emotional life within ourselves, hold it, have some self-care and some self-love, and not get thrown back into those old patterns.
And then those old patterns, there are reactions.
Yeah.
And some of that, I would imagine that some of that's really raw. And just as you were sharing that, I was just sort of sitting here reflecting on, is it okay for a man to be asked to be loved by his partner? You know, is it okay for a man to be asked to be loved?
Can you say that again?
Is it okay for a man to ask to be loved?
Oh, I see. Yep. Of course.
Really overtly, hey, I need to be loved.
Yeah.
But even saying that, you know, I'm sort of sitting here going, oh my God, you know, that, yeah, it's an authentic need, but then that sort of that masculine social conditioning has then going, hey, it's like having two voices going on in my consciousness
Yeah.
at the same time to be able to ask that question or to have that authentic need met. It's like, oh, there's that sort of the polar, yeah, it's like a polar resistance going on internally at an energetic level.
There's almost two questions in there then, Mark. Is it okay to ask for that? Yeah, hell yeah, of course. It's absolutely okay. Does society tell us that it's okay? Sometimes yes, a lot of the time no.
That's sad.
Yeah.
Because there's so much missing, you know, that's going to impact on so much connection. And I'm wondering how much that then leaves men feeling really raw deep down, that they don't want to connect to that sensitivity because of the rawness, that raw, and therefore I'll armour it up and, yeah, I'll close the drawbridge, so to speak.
Yeah, pull up the drawbridge, batten down the hatches, move on, act like it's okay, retreat into the head or into work.
Into work, yeah.
Or into sport.
Yeah.
Or into alcohol or pornography. Yeah.
So how do we change it? What's the course of action that, you know, men like you and I and other men are, you know, there seems to be, even, you know, when you look at some of the younger generation, their 20s, they've had a much, yeah, sure, there's still that element of that toxic masculine social conditioning, but it's lessened, perhaps?
I reckon it's lessening. Now, I'm trying to remember back when I first heard this term, maybe I'm thinking 10 years, when the word bromance entered the popular consciousness.
Yeah. That was
Would you say about 10 years ago?
Yeah, Big Brother time, the bromance, the Big Brother,
yeah,
the Big Brother stuff, yeah.
Which, you know, probably still to a certain extent set men's relationships within certain parameters and boundaries. But it was an interesting societal acknowledgement that men could have friends that they were close to.
and that's really interesting because, you know, men will connect and hug and have closeness on the football field, but then, you know, oh, I can't do that. I just want to touch base with no. It is so sad as I feel deep love and connection. In a few moments, my husband has been truly, I need to say a bit more, truly vulnerable. Yeah. It's so sad as I feel such deep love and connection. In a few moments, my husband's been truly vulnerable. And that is so, you know, that really, Natalie, you're really talking about that, deep connection. And, you know, when you've got so much love to give, and we men have walled it off. You want to give that love. It's like the love sort of bounce. That energy of love is like bouncing, hits the wall and bounce back, and it's like,
Yeah.
not very nice. And it's like, when men in pubs and have had 100 beers, they're all over each other. They are connecting. There's that sensitivity. Yeah, they do connect and do. I guess they are vulnerable under the influence and share their true feelings for their mates.
Yeah. And, you talked about shame earlier, and I think alcohol dulls that sense of shame or embarrassment and enables connection to occur. So this is where I wonder, about shame or being ashamed as kind of it's a social construct or a social conditioning that it's not real, it's not essential to us, but it's something we carry around. And then something like alcohol is often a way of numbing that feeling whilst enabling those other ones to come through.
Yeah, the GABA receptors get knocked out and
Yeah.
out it comes. But it's like, that deep, that the joy and the gift. I just can, just following up reflecting on what Natalie's talked about, that.
Yes.
It's like the meeting, the meeting of souls, the meeting of that really, just in that moment. And imagine, when women want to give their husbands that beautiful love, that they're creating a beautiful, safe place for it. And we men don't take that opportunity to immerse ourselves and to be nourished and cared in that energy of their deep love for us. It's like, and the safety is a key there. And how can we as men create a society that increases the safety and the acceptance and the acknowledgement that sensitivity is a gift?
We've got to change the rules. But how do we do that?
But how do we do that? How do we change those rules? And by changing those rules, because to be ashamed of it is not safe. So if we turn around to acceptance, it's normal, it's natural and normal. It is a deep need. We've needed it since we've been born, otherwise we wouldn't survive.
Yep.
And I'm wondering whether we perhaps will always have that fragile, sensitive part of us, and maybe it is a bit childlike. Coochie. When I'm fucking around, when we're being intimate and we go into that childlike, and I'm wondering whether that childlike aspect of ourselves, I'm wondering whether we're always going to have that. It's something we can't avoid, but that childlike aspect of ourselves may not necessarily cope with the rigours and the rigours and the day-to-day. We've got to sort of show up each day. My sensitivity wouldn't want to show up. I know where it'd like to be. It'd like to be held somewhere. And it's just, how do we then, in saying that, how do we also then encourage men to develop that inner journey to self-discovery, so that we can hold it within ourselves, learn to hold it within ourselves, learn to hold the reaction, when we are having reactions from the coaxes of, that Groff talked about, how do we then explore what's underneath that reaction? Oh, hang on, this is some of my old raw pain. Oh, this is triggered back in X number of years ago. How do I then be present to that?
It's just going back a step. I think you're identifying something important, which is there's a time and place, and we need to be alert and aware of when that is, when is a good time to be sensitive, and when is the right time to be strong, capable, determined, whatever. And then the next step, and we've talked about this a bit during this series of talks, is it's about courage and taking risks, choosing to do things differently. I joked a little about changing the rules before. We can't really change the rules, but we embody the rules. We embody the way things are done. So changing the way that embodiment occurs and doing things differently has got to be a good place to start.
And it's really interesting, I want to pick up on what you're sort of talking about, that there is a correct time and a correct place. But there also need to be provision and permission and allowance that, sometimes when we're really overwhelmed by, life stuff, we may not be able to, we may break down, we may just, if we're in burnout or whatever the case may be, we may not, there may not be the right time nor place. When people are, really seriously depressed, is that melancholy that, it's there, and again, how do we define, that right place? And there is I agree with you, but it's how do we be, I just really like to use that terminology, not even terminology, I really want to, how do we become more open-hearted? The more open-hearted we become as men, the deeper the connections, we can then, in our open hearts, allow that sensitivity to be there, to meet ours, to meet others, and to pass it on, and what a great gift to have that space and to not be ashamed of it. If we could do some more work on that, and it'd be really interesting to get some comments and just some feedback. And as we post this on, upload this to YouTube, just be interesting to see if we can get some comments. Just mindful of time. Any final open heart messages you might have around that space?
Just to reflect back what you said there, Mark, it's true. We can't always have absolute control. And there are times where we're going to be overwhelmed, where that part of us will come out. And perhaps as men, we need to be present and offer support to other men when they go through those times, to reduce that shame.
Yeah. Good point. Hey, thank you for sitting open-hearted tonight, mate.
Yeah, good talking to you again.
Yeah, ditto. That's really good. Let's keep these conversations flowing, and let's do our bit to try and change some of that social conditioning and rewrite those rules.
Yeah.
Right, mate.
Cool.
See you next week. Namaste. Cheers.
Namaste.
Thank you for watching this YouTube video on our Facebook Live conversations. Please give us the thumbs up, like, and subscribe down the right bottom corner. There we go. Thank you.